things I've done. Chapter 2. I am punished. Define recidivism. Tend to family matters. The worst part of lunch duty was the smock. It was red and tent-like. It made me look fat and had a dry erase velcroed to the back that read, Anya Balanchi must learn to control her temper. At first, you couldn't see this sign because of my hair, but then they made me wear a hairnet. I didn't protest. The ensemble would have seemed incomplete without the hairnet. While I collected my classmates' trays and glasses, Scarlett kept shooting me sympathetic looks, which almost made the whole thing worse. I would rather have just served my time in a completely zoned out state. For obvious reasons, I saved Gable Arsley's table for last. I can't believe I ever went out with that, he said in a low voice that was still loud enough for me to hear. Though several replies did occur to me, I smiled and said nothing. You weren't supposed to talk when you had lunch duty. I pushed the cart with the trays to the kitchen, then I went back out to the cafeteria to eat my own lunch in the 2 minutes I had left. Scarlett had moved and was now sitting with Wynne. She was leaning toward him across the table and laughing at something he said. Poor Scarlett. Her flirting technique could hardly be called subtle. And I had a sense that this approach wouldn't work with Wynne. I didn't really want to sit down with them. I smelled like cafeteria fumes and garbage. Scarlett beckoned to me. Annie, over here. I trudged over to her. Love the hairnet, Scarlett said. Thanks, I said. I was considering wearing it full time. Smock too. I set my tray and put my hands on my hips. Probably needs a belt though. I took off the smock and sat on the bench next to me. Anya, have you met Wynne? Scarlett asked. She slightly raised her eyebrows to let me know he was the one she'd been telling me about. In the principal's office. She was busy getting herself in trouble, Wynne said. Story of my life, I said. I started eating the vegetable pie in what I hoped was a somewhat ladylike fashion. Even though I was sick of smelling the stuff, I was still famished. As the bell rang, Wynne and Scarlett left, and I concentrated on speed eating. I noticed that Wynne had forgotten his hat on the table. Just as the bell rang, Wynne returned to the cafeteria. I held out the hat to him. Thanks, he said. He was about to leave, but then he sat down in the chair across from me. Felt rude to leave you here all alone. It's fine. You're late. I took one last forkful. Besides, I like my own company. He crossed his hands over his knee. I've got independent study this period anyway. I looked at him. Suit yourself. Scarlett was into him, and there was no way I would ever go for the guy she was into, no matter how nice his hands were.
That's great!
If there was one thing my dad had taught me, it was the importance of loyalty. How do you know Scarlett? French, he said, and he left it at that. Well, I'm done now, I informed him. It was high time for Wynne to be on his way. You forgot something, he said. He removed the hairnet from my hair. His thumb gently grazed my forehead, and my curls spilled out. Hairnet's nice and all, but I think I prefer you without it. Oh, I said. I felt myself blush, and I ordered myself to stop blushing. This flirtation was starting to annoy me. Why did you move here anyway? My dad's number 2 in the DA's office. It is well known that DA Silverstein was basically a puppet, too old and ailing to be effective. Being the second in command was actually like being the first in command, but without the annoyance of having to run in an election. Things must have been pretty bad for them to have brought in somebody from Albany. An outside hire implied a major regime change. In my opinion, that could only be a good thing as the city couldn't get much worse. I didn't remember exactly what happened to the old number 2, but it was probably the usual. He was incompetent or a thief. Possibly incompetent and a thief. Your dad's a new top cop? He thinks he's going to clean everything up, Wynne said. Good luck to him, I said. Yeah, he's pretty naive. Wynne shrugged. Calls himself an idealist, though. Hey, I thought you said your people were farmers, I said. My mother is. She's an agricultural engineer specializing in irrigation systems. Basically a magician who grows crops without water. My father used to be the Albany DA, though. You lied. No, I only mentioned that what was relevant to your question, which, if you recall, was how did I get my calluses? And I certainly did not get my calluses because my dad's the DA. I think you didn't say anything because you knew who my father was and? Wynne prompted me. And maybe you thought I wouldn't want to make friends with a guy whose family is on the opposite side of the law from my family. Star-crossed lovers and all of that? Hold on, I didn't say. I take it back. And I apologize if I misled you in any way. Wynne looked a bit amused to me. That's certainly a good theory, Anya. I told Wynne I had to get to class, which, in fact, I did. I was already 5 minutes late for 20th century American history. See you around, he said, and he tipped his hat. On the board, Mr. Barry had written, "Those who don't remember history are doomed to repeat it." I wasn't sure if this was meant to be inspirational, thematic, or a joke about making sure to study. Anya Balanchine, Mr. Barry said. Nice of you to join us. I'm sorry, Mr. Barry. I had lunch duty. Thus, Miss Balanchine provides us with a walking example of the societal problems of crime, punishment, and recidivism. If you can tell me why this is so, I won't send you back to headmaster's office for a late pass. I'd only had Mr. Barry for one day, so I couldn't completely tell if he was serious or not. Miss Balanchine, we're waiting. I tried not to sneer when I answered. The criminal is punished for his or her crimes, but the punishment itself leads to more crimes. I was punished for fighting by being given lunch duty, and the lunch duty itself made me tardy. Ding, 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 ding. Give this woman a prize, Mr. Barry said. You may take your seat, Miss Balanchine. And now, boys and girls, can anyone tell me what the noble experiment refers to? Allison Wheeler, the pretty redhead who would likely be our class's valedictorian, raised her hand. No need for any hand raising in my classroom, Miss Wheeler. I like to think of us as being in discussion. Yes, Allison said, lowering her hand. The noble experiment is another name for the first prohibition, which lasted from 1920 to 1933 and banned the sale and consumption of alcohol in the United States. Very good, Mrs. Wheeler. Any brave soul wish to hazard a guess as to why I have chosen to start the year with the noble experiment? I tried to ignore the fact that all my classmates were looking at me. Finally, Chai Pinter, the class gossip, offered, because of maybe how chocolate and caffeine are today. Ding, 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 ding. You aren't quite as dull lot as you look, Mr. Barry proclaimed. For the rest of the period, he lectured about prohibition. How temperance people believed that banning alcohol would magically solve everything there was wrong with society. Poverty, violence, crime, etc. And how the temperance movement succeeded, in the short term at least, because it allied itself with other more powerful movements, many of which didn't care about alcohol one way or the other. Alcohol had been a pawn. I wasn't an expert on the chocolate ban as it had happened before I was born, but there were definite similarities. Daddy had always told me there was nothing inherently evil about chocolate. They had just gotten caught up in a larger whirlwind involving food, drugs, health, and money. Our country had chosen chocolate because the people in power needed to pick something, and chocolate was what they could live without. Daddy once said, every generation spins the wheel, Anya, and where it lands defines the good. Funny thing is, they never know they're spinning it, and it hits something different every time. I was still thinking about Daddy when I was aware of Mr. Barry calling my name. Miss Balanchine, care to weigh in on the reason the noble experiment ultimately failed? I narrowed my eyes. Why are you asking me specifically? I would make him say it. Only because I haven't heard from you in a while, Mr. Barry lied. Because people like their liquor, I said stupidly. That's true, Miss Balanchine. A bit more, though. Something from your personal experience, perhaps. I was starting to loathe this man. Because banning anything leads to organized crime. And people will always find a way to get what they want. And there will always be criminals willing to provide it. The bell rang. I was glad to be out of there. Miss Balanchine, Mr. Barry called to me. Stay a moment. I'm worried we may have gotten off on the wrong foot here. I could have pretended I hadn't heard him, I suppose, but I didn't. I can't. I'll be late for the next class, and you know what they say about recidivists. I'm thinking of asking Win to come out with us this Friday, Scarlett said on the bus back from school. Oh, Win, Natty said. I like him. That's because you have excellent taste, Natty darling, Scarlett said, kissing Natty on the cheek. I rolled my eyes at both of them. If you like him so much, you should ask him out by yourself, I told Scarlett. Why do you need me to come with you? I'll only be a third wheel. Annie, Scarlett whined. Don't be dense. If it's just me and him, I'll be the weird girl who asked him out. If you're there, it's more casual and friendly. Scarlett turned toward my sister. Natty agrees with me. Right? Natty paused to give me a look before nodding. Once everything is going well, you two should have a signal that means it's time for Annie to leave. Something like this, Scarlett said. She winked in a ridiculous and cartoonish way that contorted half her face. Really subtle, I said. Win will never notice that. Come on, Annie. I have to stake my claim before someone else does. You have to admit that he's perfect for me. Based on what? I asked. You barely even know him. Based on... We both like cats. And he's pretty, Natty added. He is pretty, Scarlett said. I swear, Annie, I will never ask you for anything ever again. Oh, all right, I grumbled. Scarlett kissed me. I love you, Annie. I was thinking we'd go to that speakeasy your cousin Fats runs. Yeah, that might not be such a great idea, Scar. Why not? Haven't you heard? Mr. Completely Perfect's dad is the new top cop. Scarlett's eyes grew wide. Seriously? I nodded. I guess we'll have to pick somewhere legal then, Scarlett said. That pretty much eliminates just about everything fun. The bus stopped on 5th, and the three of us walked the remaining 6 blocks to my apartment. Scarlett was coming to study as she often did. We entered the building and walked past the empty doorman cubicle. After the last doorman had been killed and his family had been sued, the apartment board decided that they couldn't afford to pay a doorman anymore. And we rode the elevator up to the penthouse. Scarlett and Natty went into my bedroom while I checked on Nana. Imogen, Nana's nurse, was reading to her. At the beginning of my life, I record that I was born, as I might have been informed and believed, On a Friday at 12 o'clock at night, it was remarked that the clock began to strike, and I began to cry simultaneously. Even though I wasn't much of a reader, Imogen had a sweet voice that lulled me, and I found myself standing at the door to listen for a while. She read until the end of the chapter, which wasn't very long, then closed the book. "You're here for the start of this one," Imogen said to me. She held up the paper novel so that I could see the title, David Copperfield. "Anyashka, when did you get here?" Nana asked. I walked over to her and kissed her cheek. "I wanted something with more action," Nana said, wrinkling her nose. "Girls, guns." But this is what she had. "It gets more exciting," Imogen assured her. "You must be patient, Galina." "If it takes too long, I'll be dead," Nana replied. "Enough with the gallows humor," Imogen reprimanded. I took the book from Imogen and held it to my face. The dust stung my nose. The aroma was salty and a bit sour. The cover of the book was disintegrating. There hadn't been new books printed, on account of the cost of paper, for as long as I've been alive, maybe longer. Nana once told me that when she was a girl, there used to be huge stores filled with paper books. Not that I ever went to any of the bookstores. I had better things to do, she'd say with longing in her voice. Ah, to be young. These days, most everything was digitized. All the paper books had been pulped and recycled into essentials, like toilet tissue and money. If your family or school happened to be in possession of a bona fide paper book, you held onto it. By the way, one of the goods the Balanche Samya dealt in was black market paper. "You bird if you like," Imogen said to me. "It really does get more exciting." My grandmother's home health care worker was an avid paper book collector, which seems ridiculously old-fashioned to me. Why would a person want all those dirty paper carcasses around? Still, books had value for her, and I knew it was a sign of respect that she would offer one of them to me. I shook my head. "No thanks. I have a ton of reading for school. I preferred reading on my slate, and it wasn't much for fiction anyway." Imogen checked my grandmother's machines one last time before she bid us good night. "I suppose you found Leonard," Nana said after Imogen had left. "I did." I paused, uncertain whether to trouble Nana with the story of where and with whom Leo had been. "He was at the pool with Peroski and Fats," Nana said. "I asked him this morning." "Well, what's your opinion?" Nana shrugged her shoulders, which made her cough. "Maybe it's a good thing. It's nice that family has taken an interest in your brother. Leo's too much among us women. He could stand for some male companionship in his life." I shook my head. "I don't have a good feeling about this, Nana. Yakov Tizoki is not exactly trustworthy. Still, he's family, Anya, and family takes care of family. That's how it's done. That's how it's always been done. Besides, Fats, at least, seems a decent enough sort." Nana coughed again, and I poured her some water from a pitcher on the nightstand. "Thank you, Devotka." Leo said something about getting a job at the pool. Nana's eyes widened for a moment, and then she nodded. He didn't tell me that part. Well, there have certainly been men that were far more simple-minded than Leo." "Like who?" I've got it." She smiled triumphantly. "Like Viktor Popov. He was of my generation. 6 feet 10 inches, 350 pounds. Would have been one hell of a football player if he could have remembered the rules. The other guys called him Victor the Mule to his face and the donkey behind his back. When they needed someone to move the stuff from the back of the truck, they'd call the mule every time. Doesn't matter how high-tech things get. Sometimes you need a guy who's good with manual labor. I nodded. Nana was making some sense. For the first time since Leo had gone missing, I felt my stomach muscles unclench a little. What's happened to Victor the mule anyway? That's not the important part. Nana? He got shot in the head. Bled to death. Real shame. Nana shook her head. Not exactly a good end, Nana. And Leo's not exactly the mule body type. I said. My brother was tall, but he was thin as paper. My point is, Devochka, that it takes all kinds to run the business. And your brother's a big boy now. I gritted my teeth. Anyashka, you're too much like your father. You want to control the whole world and everyone in it, but you can't. Let whatever this is, and it's likely nothing, play out. If we need to intervene later, we will. Besides, Leo would never leave the clinic. He loves the animals too much. So we do nothing? Sometimes that's the only thing to do, Nana said. Although, yes? Get yourself a chocolate bar from the closet, she ordered. Chocolate doesn't solve everything, Nana. It solves a whole heck of a lot, though, she said. I went into her closet. I pushed back the coats to open the safe. Move the gun out of the way. I took a chocolate bar. Balanchine Special Dark. I put the gun back. Closed the safe. Something wasn't right. One of the guns was missing. My father's Smith & Wesson. Nana? I called. She didn't answer. I went back to her bedroom. She was already fast asleep. Nana? I repeated, shaking her shoulder. What? She sputtered. What? One of the guns is missing, I said, from the safe. Daddy's gun. Were you planning to use it tonight? Take the Colt instead. Nana chuckled. That turned into a choke, so I gave her some water. Imogen probably moved it. I think she mentioned something about cleaning it, or not being safe to keep the weapons in one place, or... I'm sorry. I can't remember. Her face looked sad and confused for a moment. I wanted to cry. She smiled. Don't worry so much, darling. You can ask her tomorrow. I kissed my grandmother's cheek, and I left. On the way back to my room, I passed Leo's. His door was shut, but I could see the light from the crack on the bottom. He must have gotten home while I was talking to Nana. I looked at my watch. 4:10. Slightly early for my brother to be back home from work. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again. Still, no answer. I put my ear against the wood. I could barely make out muffled sobs. Leo, I know you're in there. What's wrong? Go away, Leo said, his voice thick with tears. I can't do that, Leo. I'm your sister. There's something the matter. I need to know what it is so I can help. I heard the sound of Leo fastening the lock. Please, Leo, if you don't open this right now, I'll have to pick the lock. You know I can. I had done it many times after Leo had locked himself in his room, both by accident and on purpose. Leo unlocked and opened the door. His eyes were bloodshot and trails of snot were coming out his nose. When he cried, my brother looked about 6 years old. His face turned pink and clenched up like a rose or a fist. I put my arms around him, which made Leo cry even harder. Oh no, Leo, what happened? Is this something with Jax? Leo shook his head. After perhaps 30 more seconds of tears, Leo managed to tell me the cause of his distress. He couldn't look at me in the eye. He finally said that he had lost his job at the veterinary clinic. Don't worry, Leo. I rubbed his back the way he liked. When he had calmed down somewhat, I asked him to explain what had happened. It turned out that the veterinary clinic had been shut down. After Leo had gotten back from lunch, someone from the New York City Department of Health had shown up for an unscheduled inspection. The clinic had been cited for 51 violations. Most of them having to do with cleanliness, and had been ordered to immediately cease. operations. But it was clean, Leo said. I know it was clean. It was my job to clean it. And I do a good job. Everyone says I'm doing a good worker, Annie. It's not your fault, I assured my brother. This sort of thing happened every day. Clearly, someone at the clinic hadn't been paying off the right person at the Department of Health. Here's my prediction, Leo. I bet you anything the clinic will reopen in a couple of weeks, and you'll be back at work in no time. Leo nodded, but his eyes were unconvinced. They sent away the animals, Annie. You don't think they'll hurt them, do you? No. A couple of years ago, there had been a move to ban all pets from the city, but there were protests and it didn't fly. Some people still thought non-working animals were a waste of our limited resources. Quite honestly, I wasn't sure what would happen, but there were no use telling Leo about that. I made a mental note to call Leo's boss, Dr. Pilarski, to see if there was anything I could do to help. Leo said he was tired, so I tucked him into bed and told him I'd wake him for dinner. I didn't want to cry in front of them at work, he said. When it happened, I wanted to cry. I held it in. You were very brave, I said. I turned off his lights and closed the door. When I got back to my room, Natty and Scarlet were monopolizing the space on the bed. I wasn't in the mood to kick out my little sister, so I just sat on the floor. Everything all right? Scarlet asked. The usual, I replied. Family drama. Well, Natty and I were actually very productive, Scarlet said. We came up with a list of potential places to take Win on Friday night. Seems a bit premature, seeing as he hadn't even agreed to go with us yet, I said. Scarlet ignored me and held out her hand, which was where the list was written. Little Egypt, the Lion's Den, the Times, see a concert/show, Co. Scarlet had sweated off half of number 5. What's that last one? Co squinted at her hand. Comedy. Yeah, that was kind of a lame anyway. Definitely Little Egypt, I told her. You're only saying that because it's close to your house, Scarlet said. What of it? It'll be interesting if you've ever been there. Plus, you're planning to ditch me anyway, right? True, if it all goes well. By the time Scarlet left, it was nearly 5 o'clock and I had yet to even consider my homework. The same is true for Natty. Scat, I ordered. Natty stood up. You should tell her, Natty said. Get started on your homework, I said. I sat down on my desk and turned out my slate. I should tell who what? Scarlet. You should tell Scarlet you like Win. I shook my head. I don't like Win. Well, then, you should tell her that he likes you. You don't know that, I said. I was there yesterday. I saw, Daddy said. I turned to look at my sister. Scarlet saw him first. It's stupid. And I just broke up with someone, so, Natty rolled her eyes. It's gonna be trouble if you don't tell her. What do you know? You're a little kid, I said. I honestly had no idea why I'd been entertaining this line of discussion for so long. I know some things, Annie. Like, it's not every day a super cute boy comes along that doesn't care who our family is. Mostly, you end up with dummies like Gable. And Win likes you, which is practically a miracle. You're not exactly the easiest person in the world to like, you know. Go study, now, I ordered, and close my door. Daddy scurried to the door, but before she shut it, she whispered, You know I'm right. Other than the 3 respective textures of our hair, the main difference between Natty and me was that she was a romantic and I was a realist. I couldn't afford to be romantic. I'd had to take care of her and Nana and Leo since I was 9 years old. So, yeah, I wasn't blind. I saw that Win probably liked me. and I could truly say that I didn't care. He didn't even know me. He probably just had a thing for brunettes or C-cup breasts, or my particular pheromones, or blah blah blah. Whatever dumb thing made anyone like anyone. Romance was a complete waste anyway. My mother had felt romantic about my father, and look where that got her. Dead at 38. This isn't to say I couldn't imagine that there were probably a few nice things about falling in love. I was about to start my homework when I remembered that I needed to call Dr. Pekarsky for Leo. I picked up the phone. We use phones sparingly because of how heavy they were taxed and the long-held belief in my family that our lines were being tapped. I dialed Mr. Pekarsky's home number. I liked her. I had spoken to her several times in the process of securing the position at the clinic for Leo in the first place, and she had always been straight with me. More importantly, she'd always been good to Leo. I felt like I owed her one. Her voice was clearly stressed when she answered the phone. "Oh, Anya," she said, "I suppose you've heard. The guy from the DOH seemed to have it in for us." I asked Dr. Pekarsky for the name of the DOH employee. "Wendell Yorick," she said, and then I had her spell it. My family still had some good friends spread across the various government agencies, and I hoped I could speed the process along a bit. After I hung up with Dr. Pekarsky, I called my family's attorney, Mr. Kipling, 2 phone calls in one day. Mr. Kipling had been the family's lawyer since before I was born. My father told me that I could always count on Mr. Kipling, and Daddy didn't say that about nearly anyone else. "So you want me to cut this Mr. York a check?" Mr. Kipling asked after I explained the situation. "Yeah," I said, "or, an envelope filled with cash."
Of course, Anya. It was just a term of art. I have no plans to literally cut anyone at the Department of Health a check. Incidentally, it still might take a couple of weeks to sort this out, Mr. Kipling said. So hold tight, Anya. Tell Leo to hold tight too. Thanks, I said. "How's junior year treating ya?" Mr. Kipling asked. I groaned. "That good?" "Don't ask," I said. "I got in a fight the first day, but it wasn't my fault." Sounds like Leo. Senior, I mean. Mr. Kipling had gone to high school with Daddy. "How's Galena?" "Good days and bad days," I said. "We're all getting by." "Your father would be proud of you, Annie." I was about to say goodbye when I decided to ask Mr. Kipling what he knew about Yakov Pirotsky. Small-time guy who wishes he were big-time. Won't happen, though. No one in the organization really takes him seriously, especially his own father. And since his mother wasn't, Yuri's wife, Jax is pretty much dogged by questions of whether he's even a real Balanchine. I pity the kid, to tell you the truth. Yuri, by the way, was Yuri Balanchine, my father's half-brother and my uncle. He'd taken over the family after Daddy's murder. Mr. Kipling changed his subject. "Have you decided what colleges you're applying to?" I sighed. "The offer still stands for me to be your escort on your college tour." "Thanks, Mr. Kipling. I'll keep that in mind. Even if I went on such a thing, I'd probably take Leo with me." "It will be my pleasure, Anya." I hung up the phone. Talking to Mr. Kipling always managed to make me feel less lonely and more alone at the same time. I sometimes imagined that Mr. Kipling was my father. I imagined what it would be like to have a father who was a respectable profession like a lawyer. I imagined what it would be like to have the kind of father who took you on college tours. The kind of father who was still alive. Even before Daddy died, I sometimes imagined asking Mr. Kipling to adopt me. But Mr. Kipling already had a daughter. Her name was Grace, and she was studying to be an engineer. I'd finally opened my history reading when there was a knock at the door. It was Leo. "Annie, I'm hungry," he said. so I put away my slate and went to tend my family's needs.